Welcome to another edition of the Tuesday Horror Tales. I'm your host, Prajna. Tonight, before sharing a story, I would like to share with you all a Gothic poem. To Ullalum, a Ballad by Edgar Allan Poe. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Ober, in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Ober, in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Here once, through an alley titanic, of cypress I roamed with my soul. Of cypress with psyche my soul. These were days when my heart was volcanic, as the scoriac rivers that roll, as the lavas that restlessly roll their sulphurous currents down Yannick, in the ultimate climbs of the pole that groan as they roll down Mount Yannick, in the realms of the boreal pole. Our talk had been serious and sober, but our thoughts, they were placid and sere. Our memories were treacherous and sere, for we knew not the month was October, and we marked not the night of the year. Ah, night of all nights in the year. We noted not the dim lake of Ober, though once we had journeyed down here. We remembered not the dark tarn of Ober, not the howl-haunted woodlands of Weir. And now, as the night was sensant, and star dials pointed to morn, as the star dials hinted of morn, at the end of our path of liquescent and nebulous lustre was born, out of which a miraculous crescent arose with a duplicate horn, Astarte's bediamond crescent, distinct with its duplicate horn. And I said, she's warmer than Dian. She rolls through an ether of sighs. She revels in a region of sighs. She has seen that the tears are not dry on these cheeks where the warm never dies, and has come past the stars of the lion to point us the path to the skies, to the Lethean pace of the skies. Come up, in despite of the lion, to shine on us with her bright eyes. Come up, through the lair of the lion, with love in her luminous eyes. But Psyche, uplifting her finger, said, sadly, this star I mistrust. Her pallor I strangely mistrust. O Hessen, oh, let us not linger. O fly, let us fly, for we must. In terror she spoke, letting sink her wings till they trailed in the dust. In agony sobbed, letting sink her plumes till they trailed in the dust, till they sorrowfully trailed in the dust. I replied, this is nothing but dreaming. Let us on by this tremulous light. Let us bathe in the crystalline light. Its sybillic splendor is beaming with hope and beauty tonight. See, it flickers up the sky through the night. Ah, we safely may trust to its gleaming, and be sure it will lead us all right. We safely may trust to a gleaming, that cannot but guide us aright, since it flickers up to heaven through the night. Thus I pacified Psyche and kissed her and tempted her out of her gloom and conquered her scruples and gloom, and we passed to the end of the vista, but was stooped by the door of a tomb, by the door of a legended tomb. And I said, "What is written, sweet sister, on the door of this legended tomb?" She replied, "Ulalum, Ulalum, 'tis the vault of thy lost Ulalum." Then my heart, it grew ashen and sober, as the leaves that were crisped and sere, as the leaves that were withering and sere, and I cried, it was surely October, on this very night of last year, that I journeyed down here, that I brought a dead burden down here, on this night of all nights in the year. Oh, what demon has tempted me here? Well, I know now this dim lake of Auber, this misty mid-region of Weir. Well, I know now this dank turn of Auber in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Said we then, the two then, can it have been that the woodlandish ghouls, the pitiful, the merciful ghouls, to bar up our way and to ban it from the secret that lies in these worlds, from the thing that lies hidden in these worlds, had drawn up the scepter of a planet from the limbo of lunary souls, this sinfully scintillant planet from the hell of the planetary souls. Friends, we live in a world which is guided by logic and science, but then there are so many things which are beyond logic and science. Ulalum is not just a ballad, but an expression of these so many things that lie beyond us. Tonight, the story that I'm going to share with all of you is entitled Red Hydrengas. Hydrengas refers to this beautiful wild flower or wild shrub which is very colorful in nature and can be found in many hilly areas. Red Hydrengas by Victor Banerjee. 1 p.m. As Sheila lay in bed, a single crystal on the chandelier above her trembled. The footsteps in the hall had stopped. The moon shone straight through the skylight, its beams falling on the dresser and the lace daily that lay under her sister's photograph. Yes, that would make a great story. But this time, let me tell it as plainly as it really happened. Ranjit, the erstwhile abbey cook, lived in the Protestant graveyard. Nobody had the guts to take his place, and so no one threw him out. He earned a daily wage whenever he wanted to, and spent the rest of his time stoned on charas. He had bitten off his wife's nose when she was unfaithful, and tired of sophistry had wrapped the bishop's banquet in its tablecloth and flung it down the hill. He once went down to Woodstock School to deliver a package to my daughters and scared the living daylights out of every Christian missionary he passed. A legend in Landor, Ranjit is a self-proclaimed sannyasi. Last autumn, on the 7th of October, it had drizzled all day. By the time evening came around, a sticky fog had descended into the oak forest around us. I watched a chestnut leaf spiral down and settle on the ground just outside the boundary wall of the graveyard. I was alone, taking an evening stroll. It was 7:30. I remember the time because our dog, Badshah, had been barking into the fog when our little kitten knocked over the onyx timepiece on the dressing table. I could hear Ranjit's laugh resounding through the deodars and wondered what was amusing him. As I passed the cemetery gate and looked up, a sudden chill wind twisted around the weepy skemores with a groan. Something caught my sleeve. I turned. A large red tongue, a dirty, spiky teeth grinned at me. I could have died, but it was only Ranjit. He was swirling his head and glaring at me through the long strands of matted hair that swished past his face. He stopped and stared deeper into my guts. "What's happened?" I asked sheepishly. He grabbed my arm and swung me through the cemetery gate up to his hut and set me down, rather unceremoniously, beside the cypress planted in 1870 by HRH, the Duke of Edinburgh. By the way, HRH means His Royal Highness. Outside his room, there was a fire burning in a hole in the ground. Near it, seated on a broken cane chair, was a young European. Although he looked pale, I could tell from his face, licked as it was by the leaping flames, that he had spent some weeks in our country. Another scholar from the language school, I thought, arrived in Missouri ostensibly for a cultural awakening through Hindi grammar. A bit of grassy and curious forays into the villages of India. "That's not true," he said, barely audible over the sizzle and crackle of wet oak. The wind had dropped and the fire burned the mist, its nimbus enveloping the three of us. "What's not true?" I asked hesitantly. "I have come here in search of my daughter," he continued. "Ranjit knows my little girl." A sudden roar of laughter from Ranjit startled me. "She left looking for red hydrangeas and hasn't come back. It's a rare flower, difficult to find, blood red. There used to be some growing here." I noticed he held a twisted length of iron railing in one hand. "I wish the rain would let up. I can't stand the monsoons. The sodden earth makes me feel wet to the bones." His ashen lips quivered with a soft chuckle. "I'd love some tea, but can't swallow the stuff Ranjit makes." I turned around to find that Ranjit had disappeared. A mocking laugh rang through the silence and came from far off. There was a sudden crash in the branches above. A dark silhouette scrambled wildly through the tops and then disappeared. A faint whistle oozed from the bubbling sap of a burning log, and I squirmed when the stranger casually began to whistle the same aria. There was something spooky about all this, and I wasn't going to stay to find out what it was. I tried moving, but my legs wouldn't respond. I tried to speak, but my tongue had begun to swell. The ghostly duet grew louder. Its pitch hurt my ears. Then the stranger stood up slowly, and I could feel my heart throbbing behind my eyes
gradually pounding them out of their sockets. The log stopped whistling, but the stranger didn't. As he drew close to me, the sharp air from his pursed lips froze the pores of my skin. I got a cramp under my jaw that jarred my head back in horrific spasms, and then he stopped. The blood rushed back into my face, scalding the skin around my eyes, but I still could not move. Then,
"Goodbye, Victor,"
he said with a warmth that miraculously soothed every nerve in my body.
"If you see Anna, tell her not to bother about the red hydrangeas." He walked away, past fallen angels and crumbling urns, tapping the twisted rod against the riding boots I now noticed he was wearing. The mists took him in and then rested on the curling ivy that shone weakly under a vaporous moon.
A barking deer coughed somewhere in the valley. For a moment I wondered what it was that had disturbed the trees above us. I was sure it wasn't languor, but then, what was it? And how and where did it vanish so suddenly? It's a mystery I have never been able to solve. I stepped out of the cemetery and walked back home. The next morning, Ruskin Bond, a cheerful author of several ghost stories, dropped in for breakfast. I told him about my weird encounter. He paled and grew terribly excited. We decided to go to talk to Ranjit. It would only take a few minutes. We hopped over the boundary wall of the graveyard and could see Ranjit pottering around outside his hut. He saw us coming and burst into peals of laughter, his face artistically covered with the ashes of yesterday's fire. Suddenly, through a cluster of irises, a piece of twisted metal caught my eye. It had been stuck into a grave whose identical railings had nearly all been stolen, obviously sold for scrap. "Look," I said to Ruskin, "that's it. That's what he was holding in his hand. That's what he was holding in his hand last night." The morning dew still sparkled spectrally in the grass, and a little drop ran down the length of the metal rod and seeped quietly into the earth. Ruskin had meanwhile cleared the lichen from the headstone, and we both stared with disbelief at the words engraved. "Here lieth Richard Andrew Hughes, Lieutenant Colonel of the 61st Cavalry, a loving father, died 7th October 1926, erected by his loving wife, Marianne." Ruskin gasped as he saw something behind me. I turned quickly and fell over backwards on him. It was Ranjit who had quietly crept up on us. We both laughed uncontrollably, untangled ourselves with enormous relief, while Ranjit just stood there laughing at us. He was pointing a grimy finger at a little mound of grass nearby. I crawled over, still sniggering from the fright we had got, and tried to read the broken lettering on the grave. "In loving remembrance of Anna Marie, our beautiful daughter, aged 6, died October 2nd, 1926. She rests beside her father, who died heartbroken, erected in deep sorrow by her mother, Marianne." Strangely, though my story doesn't end here, about a week later, to my utter astonishment, a blood-red hydrangea bloomed in our front garden, a flower that exists nowhere else in Missouri. I had never spoken to my wife about the happenings of that night, and so went straight to Ruskin to discuss the phenomena. For days we debated whether I should plan cutting off the red hydrangea near Richard Hughes' grave. Finally, we decided against it. Is that what Richard would want? Would he not feel cheated to discover his daughter had not returned? Further, was my hydrangea a gift from Richard or Anna, or both? This year, on the 7th of October, I shall summon up the courage to ask. The chandelier had begun to sway. Its prisms cast patterns across her sister's face, so it seemed she was drowning again. The tinkling crystals muffled the steps that were coming closer to the door. The moon dipped into a solitary cloud, and the room was drowned in black. Crystals quivered in the dark, but its little alarms could not be heard outside the room. The handle turned, the door eased open, and the pale face of a little girl appeared around the door. Sheila, who was peeping through the duvet with one eye, screamed, "Get into your bed, you brat!" Anna crept gingerly towards her bed, and when she got there, dived under the quilt. The moon reappeared. The little red hydrangeas, patterned on Anna's patchwork quilt, glowed while she trembled inside. She wished grandmother would never tell her that story about her time in India again. But she loved the part about Ranjit biting off his wife's nose. Little Anna would never know that her grandmother, Marianne, seated in a cane chair next door, was crying. Friends, spirits, supernatural beings, and many other things go beyond the ordinary, just like relationships. There are so many relationships which go beyond the ordinary. There are so many connects which we cannot explain. Signing off for tonight, I am your host, Prajna. See you again on